No matter where you live, whether it's a town or in the country, chances are you don't live too far from a churchyard or a cemetery. Have you ever just wandered around and read some of the headstones and wondered what kind of life these people had, or wondered how they died? If you look closely, you may find one that has a curious epitaph written upon it, or a couple of words that may seem curious and hint to something intriguing. In this series, I'll be bringing you stories behind these headstones to reveal an interesting life or a tragic and sorrowful end. These are not celebrities as we know today. Some may have been recognised in their lifetime but have forgotten names now, or they may be normal folk whose lives were tragically cut short. Join me as I discover some tales from the grave. Here in the graveyard of St Leonard's Church in Mallinsley is the grave of a 52-year-old family man who went to work and never came home alive. The headstone reads, "In loving memory of my dear husband John Harris, who was killed at the Woodhouse Pit Yard, May the 20th, 1930, aged 52 years, at rest." The Woodhouse Pit was located where Priorslee Flash is now. The local paper, the Wellington Journal, reported, "Old Park miner killed in pit fatality." A fatal accident in the Lilleshall Company's Woodhouse Pit on Thursday when a fall of roof was the cause of a miner named John Harris losing his life. The deceased resided at Forge Row, Old Park, and was 52 years of age. An inquiry was held into the cause of the accident by the District Coroner, Mr J.V.T. Lander, on Wednesday, and this was attended by Mr E. Rowley, Miners Inspector, and Mr J.A. Holmes, representing the Lilleshall Company. Formal evidence of identification was given by the deceased's brother Enoch Harris, who described the deceased as a practical and competent miner of many years' experience and without any disability. Sidney Potts, a surveyor in the employ of the Lilleshall Company, put in a plan showing the underground workings of number 19 stall in the pit where the accident occurred, and demonstrated to the jury the work which deceased was performing when the accident took place. Joseph Hughes, a stall man living at 51 Red Lake, said that he was employed at the Woodhouse Pit, and on the morning of the accident he was working in the same stall as the deceased and another miner named Ernest Blakemore. Witness and the latter were engaged in raising the height of the roof in this particular stall. This involved his having to withdraw two bars which were supporting the roof. The bars were taken out, and whilst they were a short distance away, a fall of roof was heard by Witness, and he and Blakemore went to the scene and found the deceased doubled up and partially buried beneath a fall of roof of about 1,400 weights, equivalent to 711 kilograms. One piece of rock had to be levered in order to get the deceased free, and the injuries, which were extensive to the head and face, had accounted for his death, and Witness was of opinion that the man was dead when liberated. Witness also added that there were two slips running parallel visible after the fall. This was work with which the deceased was quite familiar, and there was nothing unusual in the way in which it was being carried out. Ernest Blakemore of 16 Mafeking Terrace, Rockwardine Wood, gave evidence in support of the last witness's statement, and asked for his opinion as to the cause of the accident, remarked that he thought deceased was taken unawares. The reason for this was that the deceased's hammer was found underneath him, whilst the pick and shovel were placed standing on the right under the pack. It was possible that he was in the act of bending down to pick up the hammer when the fall occurred. Noah Stanley, the fireman employed at the pit, spoke on to having examined the working on that particular morning and to conversation with Mr Harris as to work he was going to undertake. At that time there was nothing unusual in the workings, and everything appeared normal. Replying to the miner's inspector, Witness said that the slips spoken of were not visible before the fall, and it was customary to warn men to take special care when slips were detected. He, the witness, had had a lot of experience in underground workings and could not offer any suggestion whereby a similar accident could be avoided. The mines inspector said that it looked as though, having regard to the danger of the roof falling when the bars were taken out, the only thing for a miner to do was to give it as wide a berth as possible, and if a tool was left under the roof and was required, it was wise to reach it with something else and not get under. Witness said he agreed. The coroner said that this was a very sad case where a practical miner, well accustomed to his work and acknowledged as a good workman by the company, had lost his life in doing a job that was not unusual. It was a job he had done many times before and would probably be done by the two witnesses who had given evidence tomorrow, but it behoved the men engaged on that work to be very careful. If anything could be done to assist in the protection of these men, it should be done. The jury returned a verdict of accidental death, and Mr. Holmes, on behalf of the company, expressed sympathy with the relatives, and the coroner said he felt sure the jury also would like to associate themselves with that expression. John Harris left behind his wife, Harriet Ann, who was 50, and children, John, Enoch, Mabel, Edward, Emily, Henry, Edna, Mary and Annie. His wife, Harriet Ann, died May the 12th, 1957, aged 77, and she was buried with her husband. We can't begin to imagine what her life was like after losing her husband. He went out to work in the morning as usual and never came home alive. The mine closed prior to 1951, so John's widow Harriet would have seen the closure of the pit where her husband was killed in her lifetime, and the remains of Ford Row where they lived is now lost under a road close to the Telford town centre. The small towns and villages that were merged in the 1960s to make Telford New Town were once various mining areas, and it's hard now to imagine what these places were like. But even as recent as the 1970s, there were mining accidents and deaths in the area, and poor John Harris is just one of hundreds who sadly lost their lives working at the pit.